The twin suns of Valora cast sharp shadows across the polished obsidian tiles of the Intergalactic Academy's launch range. The air shimmered with electromagnetic haze, a byproduct of the testing zone's protective dome stretching miles into the sky. Around its perimeter, alien cadets bustled with excitement, adjusting instruments, arguing in mathematical dialects, and calibrating launch devices as tall as buildings. The grand launch exam was about to begin. This wasn't just any academic test. It was the Academy's most prestigious and challenging rite of passage, a final practical proving ground where students demonstrated their ability to launch a solid object from the planetary surface and strike the moon Vexen using nothing more than potential energy. Propulsion engines, guided systems, and AI targeting aids were forbidden. The challenge was pure: gravity, calculation, and instinct. Each of the 47 participating species had been preparing for months. The Krillorians, with their crystalline minds and hive mind computation, brought a triple helix rail launcher capable of calculating lunar drift in real time. The Centauri, fluid-bodied beings from a gas giant, installed a plasma tension net that absorbed solar flares to charge their launch mechanism. The Vartheks, infamous for their obsession with symmetry, used a harmonic wave platform that converted vibration into kinetic bursts. Every team boasted technology that stretched the limits of science. And then there was Tori Carter, the only human in the program. She stood alone at the far edge of the range, half shielded by a pile of volcanic boulders. Her station consisted of 3 things: a coil of braided vine, 2 firm Y-shaped stones hammered into the ground, and a small pile of metal pellets she had personally crafted from scavenged debris. There were no monitors, no glowing panels, no scanning drones hovering above her setup, just dirt, stones, and her own 2 hands. To the others, her preparation seemed laughable. Whispers passed between alien cadets. Some watched in confusion. Others chuckled in condescending amusement. Is she building a trap for rodents? A tall Silverian snickered, adjusting the dials on his suspension vector reader. She doesn't even have a targeting array, muttered a Krillorian who had 4 floating sensor orbs hovering around his head. This is the launch exam, not a primitive festival. Tori didn't respond. She crouched low, checking the tension in the vines stretched between the stone anchors. It had taken her days to find the right elasticity. She hadn't asked for help. She hadn't needed calculations. She had studied the moon with her own eyes, taken notes during dusk and dawn, watched the curvature of Vexen's rise each night, and measured the shadows with a stick and a stopwatch. No advanced tech, just her instincts, her muscle memory, and her trust in the physics she had learned on Earth. Inside the observation tower, a panel of professors monitored each cadet's progress. One of them, a Nornaxian with translucent skin and glowing nerves, leaned back with mild irritation. "I still don't understand why the human was admitted," he said in a cold, hissing tone. "Their species is clever in theory, yes, but this is a serious scientific challenge." Across the table, a Zellery female with fractal patterns shifting across her forehead raised a hand. "That's precisely why she was chosen. She represents the unpredictable. The Academy has grown too reliant on precision and simulation. This will test whether intuition has any place left among logic." The room fell into a respectful silence. No one dared question the judgment of the Zellery, known for calculating probabilities 5 dimensions deep. If she had said the human was valuable, then the experiment would proceed. Outside, a gong sounded. The exam had officially begun. The students moved to their launch pads. One by one, alien cadets began activating their devices. Tremors rolled across the dome as the first team, the Vartheks, fired their harmonic launcher. A deep humming filled the air, followed by a crackling explosion as their projectile launched upward in a spiral of compressed sound waves. The object arced elegantly into the sky, disappearing into the violet haze of Vylora's upper atmosphere. The Krillorians launched next. Their rail cannons shuddered with power, hurling a silver dart at blinding speed. Data streamed into their processors in real time, confirming trajectory adjustments mid-flight through the object's built-in rudderless fin design. Tori watched each attempt with quiet focus, her brow furrowed slightly as she observed the angles, the speed, the curvature. Not out of intimidation, but evaluation. She had no screens, but she had eyes, and she trusted them. When it was her turn, the buzz of conversation around the dome dropped. The human was next. Every eye turned to her crude setup. Her name blinked on the scoreboard in a neutral gray. She walked calmly to the slingshot, picked up one of her metal pellets and rolled it between her fingers. The weight felt right. Her heart beat slow and steady. She placed the pellet into the center of the vine sling, drew it back with both hands, her arms trembling slightly under the tension. Her gaze fixed on the moon, now visible in the pale afternoon sky. It wasn't bright, but it was there, just above the jagged ridge to the north, glowing like a distant ghost. She squinted, adjusted the angle, felt the wind grazing her cheek, and took a deep breath. She released. The vine snapped forward with a sharp twang. The metal pellet soared upward, vanishing into the sky with a faint whistle. There was no dramatic blast, no glowing trail, no shockwave. Just silence. Everyone stared, waiting for the inevitable failure. The observation tower's screens tracked the arc. A warning blinked. No propulsion detected, no signal, no embedded transponder. The professors exchanged disappointed glances. "I suppose it was expected," the Nornaxian muttered. "A primitive guess, nothing more." But then one of the screens blinked. A secondary telescope feed from the moon Vexen zoomed in. A flash, brief, barely visible, a faint disturbance near the cratered ridge. The system paused. A red dot appeared on the moon's surface, indicating confirmed impact. Gasps erupted across the range. Tori's name lit up on the scoreboard. Direct hit. The other cadets turned to look at her. She stood still, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the sky. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. For her, it wasn't luck, it was experience. Slinging stones on Earth had taught her how to judge distance. Studying the moon's movement for days had taught her its rhythm. No technology could replace the feel of it in her gut. In that moment, she was not the oddity of the academy. She was the mark to beat, and everyone knew it. The air in the lecture amphitheater was electric, a sharp contrast to the sterile chill usually present in the Intergalactic Academy's Hall of Precision. Massive curved walls shimmered with translucent screens displaying numbers, arc diagrams, atmospheric pressure charts, and ballistic projections. Cadets filled every seat, murmuring in dozens of languages and dialects, while small drones hovered overhead to record the historic data. Tori entered last. She walked in with quiet steps, her boots still dusty from the launch range. She carried no datapad, no wrist module, and wore the same simple earth fabric jacket she had brought with her from home. Her hair was slightly windswept, and a thin line of sweat still traced her temple. She didn't sit, she leaned against the back wall, arms crossed, eyes on the massive screen that showed a frozen frame of the red dot now marking the surface of Vexen's moon. Up front, standing on a transparent levitating platform, Professor Rilvex gestured toward the visual data swirling behind him. He was Varnellin, a species of bone-thin humanoids with transparent skin and high-frequency voices. His inner organs glowed faintly with each pulse of emotion, and at the moment his nervous system shimmered with bright gold, excitement, confusion, and a hint of disbelief. "Let us begin," he announced. "We are analyzing a trajectory that violates all recorded norms of moon-bound kinetic transfer. The object, launched without technological assistance, achieved a perfect impact zone alignment, using only environmental force and estimated targeting. We must understand why this event occurred." A soft wave of data scrolled across the primary display, outlining velocity, arc height, and time of flight. Tori didn't blink. She watched the data pass without touching the translator chip in her pocket. She understood what it all meant. She just didn't need to see it to know it was right. At the front row, a Krellorian cadet raised his hand. He was tall, with a segmented neck and neural cables protruding from his shoulders. His voice buzzed with harmonic undertones. "With respect, the metrics suggest that her launch shouldn't have succeeded under standard models. She lacked elevation compensation and made no adjustment for the microcurrents near the ridgeline. Her arc violated the acceptable corridor for sustained lunar impact." Professor Rilvex nodded. "Correct, and yet the result speaks for itself. So, the next question must be asked. What does this tell us about our models?" Whispers again. Students leaned in. For most, it was unthinkable to question the models. The models were refined over centuries. They had delivered perfect simulations of subplanetary orbit transitions, meteor deflection routes, and precision mining strikes across 5 systems. Yet here, a single human had defied those models, using a method so ancient it was considered obsolete before her species reached orbit. Professor Rilvex turned slightly to the right. Tori Carter stepped forward. She pushed off from the wall and walked down slowly. Each step echoed in the silence. Cadets turned their heads to follow her path as if unsure whether they were supposed to laugh or applaud. She didn't meet any of their eyes. She kept her gaze on the floor until she reached the center of the room. "Please explain your calculation method," the professor said. "I didn't calculate," she answered, voice clear, words cutting through the silence like a knife. A few chuckles rippled through the crowd, but she didn't react. "I used my eyes, my hands. Wind pressure, lunar position, and gut alignment. I practiced tension with different materials until it felt right. I'd hit moving targets from long distance before. The moon was just higher and slower." The Silverian girl near the front, sleek, iridescent skin reflecting the blue lights, tilted her head sharply. "You expect us to believe you felt your way into a 423,000-kilometer arc with no software, no calculations, not even a parallax marker?" "Yes," Tori said. Professor Rilvex's inner glow shifted from gold to soft silver. Curiosity. He leaned forward. "And you adjusted for gravity drag manually?" "No. I remembered what my father taught me when we'd skip stones across the river back home. The angle always changes slightly when there's a wind. Your eyes can feel it if you watch the way dust floats." Professor Rilvex glanced at the screen. "Your trajectory correction was within a 0.002 margin of error. Even professional launch teams rarely achieve that. So you'll understand why it is hard for this academy to accept your explanation." "I didn't come here to make anyone comfortable," she said. "You asked us to hit a target. I did." A pause settled in. Then the professor raised both his translucent hands. "Very well. If your instinct is to be trusted, then we must test it." The lights shifted. The ceiling opened, revealing a second simulation dome, one used exclusively for augmented physics drills. The air shimmered with programmed gravity zones, wind tunnels, and pressure waves. A launch station rose from the floor, this time mechanical, standardized. "You'll be given another shot," the professor said. "This time with parameters altered. Air density fluctuates, the moon is rotating 3.8% faster, lunar position has changed. No time for study. You have 60 seconds. Tori stepped into the circle without a word. The metal sling system adjusted to her height. She picked up one of the training spheres and weighed it in her palm. It was heavier than hers, but not unmanageable. She closed her eyes. Inhale, exhale. The world fell away. Wind simulation began. Currents buffeted her from the left. She shifted her stance. Her mind wasn't calculating, it was feeling. The pressure behind her ears told her the angle was slightly off. She adjusted the sling. Her fingers remembered the weight. She could smell ionized particles. Simulation air carried scent too. That meant the charge was hot. She needed to release early. She pulled back. Let go. The sphere vanished into the air. The room held its breath. 2 seconds later, the screen flared green. Impact registered on the moon's surface. 98.7% precision. The room erupted. But not with applause. No, with disbelief, outrage, envy, and awe. Some cadets stood, some shouted questions, others scanned their devices in a frenzy, trying to track the physics of what they had just seen. Professor Rilvex stared at her in silence. "You didn't measure a single variable," he whispered. "No," she said. "Then what did you do?" "I remembered the last shot, and what I'd change if the wind were stronger." "That's not science." "It worked." He didn't respond. The data fed into the Academy's master logs. Students were dismissed shortly after, but many didn't leave. They lingered, circling Tori, unsure whether to question her, challenge her, or follow her. She ignored them all, walking back to her dormitory in silence. When she returned to her room, she found a sealed envelope on her desk, a rare gesture in a place dominated by holograms and quantum memos. Inside was a single card, invitation to Advanced Probabilistic Intuition class. Instructor, Professor Rilvex. You are now the curriculum. She stared at it, lips curving slightly. Not a smile, but something close. She dropped it into the drawer, looked out the window at the sky where the moon still floated. She wasn't here to be understood. She was here to show them what human instinct really meant. The morning sun broke through the translucent upper dome of the Academy's Launch Range Annex, casting warm lines of amber across the duraglass floor. Tori stood near a reflective panel just outside the simulation arena. her fingers tucked into her jacket pockets as her gaze settled on the activity below. Today marked the official round of public launches. Each cadet was assigned to reattempt the lunar shot under the watchful eye of the Intergalactic Board of Observation and Performance Evaluation. This time, the launches would be transmitted live to 17 planetary systems. For most students, this was the culmination of years of academic prestige. For her, it was just another challenge. Cadets were buzzing, their teams checking over last-minute variables. Launch platforms, now standardized and controlled by the Academy itself, would ensure no technological advantage could skew the performance. Every cadet received identical materials, metal spheres with equal mass and no embedded signal cores, identical synthetic sling rigs, and 15 minutes to assess the conditions before the timed launch. Tori didn't move. She watched from a distance as the others calculated and recalculated, their fingers dancing over hovering control orbs. The Centauri male from her rotation group was pacing near his rig, flicking his gelatinous hands across a floating diagram, adjusting for moisture layers that might distort his initial arc. A Varthex girl beside him was kneeling, her rigid posture unchanged as she communed with the geometric AI that had been installed within her neural matrix. Others simply sat in meditative trances, feeding algorithms into their cerebral cores. A tap on her shoulder broke her observation. She turned. Professor Rilvek stood there, his transparent skin pulsating a soft lavender, an indication of contained tension. "You're not calibrating," he said, voice even. "I don't need to," she replied calmly, her eyes returning to the launch field. "You're aware your score from this round will enter permanent record across inter-academic databases," he reminded her. "I am? And yet you're not preparing?" "I already did." His inner glow flared momentarily, then dimmed. "Very well. You'll go sixth." Tori gave a small nod. She didn't ask who would go first. It didn't matter. Inside the arena, the scoreboard flickered to life. A name blinked into existence. Tazarin Vel, Krelorian Order. Accompanied by a stream of digital accolades, the crowd hushed. Even professors leaned forward from their observation booths suspended above the dome. Zarin was tall, composed, and impossibly methodical. He stepped into the launch ring, his mechanical sling glinting with moisture collected from the atmosphere. He inserted his metal sphere and tapped the control node at his side, initiating the countdown. 10 seconds? 9. No one spoke. Zarin closed his eyes on 4. On 1, his fingers released the tension clamp and the sphere tore through the air with a thunderous whistle. The dome's upper layers rippled. The screen immediately tracked the object, calculating trajectory in real time. Impact, 91.2% accuracy. Status, registered. Applause broke out. A few alien cadets exchanged congratulatory phrases in dialects Tori didn't understand, but she knew the tone. Respect, approval, reassurance. The next few launches followed with similar routine. A Varthex female scored 89%, a Silverian boy managed 93%, but his sphere glanced the moon's rim, causing a slight delay in impact. One Centauri cadet misjudged a gravitational dip, resulting in a dismal 61%. He sank to his knees in frustration as his support unit tried to console him. Then came her name, Tori Carter, Human Sector. There were no accolades displayed beside her name, no awards, no records, just the plain text, blinking steadily. The room fell quiet, the kind of quiet that carried weight. Tori stepped forward, her boots sounding softer on the floor than any other cadets. She moved with no ceremony, no acknowledgement of the eyes tracking her every move. When she reached the rig, she didn't look at the sling. She looked up, toward the distant moon. The system had adjusted its orbit slightly since yesterday, just a fraction, but enough. She inhaled once, deeply. The wind inside the dome was simulated, but she felt it all the same. There was a subtle current from the north, barely noticeable unless one was trained to feel it. She remembered days spent skipping stones on her grandfather's ranch lake in Montana, how the breeze changed just before a storm, how leaves would tilt slightly, betraying an invisible force. Her fingers grasped the sling's control rod. She didn't use the trigger pad. Instead, she pulled it back manually, measuring the resistance with her own strength. She inserted the metal sphere and waited. She didn't hear the countdown. She didn't need it. She launched before the final second blinked out, surprising even the system, which recalibrated to pick up the sudden release. The sphere cut through the dome's upper atmosphere like a comet. No visible trail, no electronic feedback, just raw kinetic energy and precision. Silence followed. Then the screen flared. Impact, 100% accuracy. Status, direct center. No one moved. It wasn't just the score, it was the impossibility of it. The targeting grid overlay displayed a red dot precisely in the middle of the impact zone, the exact epicenter of the designated crater. The probability of such a shot, without tech, without post-release correction, was less than 1 in 30 million. Even the professors stared in disbelief. One of them, a Tharnari elder, dropped her stylus. The object struck the floor with a faint metallic click that echoed in the silence. Tori turned from the platform without a word. She didn't look up at the screen. She didn't need to see the number. She had felt it before she let go. As she exited the ring, Professor Rilvex met her at the threshold. He said nothing, but his glow had changed. The silver was gone, replaced by pure white. Not clarity. She passed him and walked through the corridor beyond the launch zone. Behind her, the room began to buzz again, louder this time. A dozen cadets spoke at once. The noise built with intensity as the implications spread. By the time she reached the outer plaza, the sunlight had turned golden, and the twin shadows of the Academy's towers stretched long across the sky. A few younger students outside turned to look at her, not with mockery as they had before, but with uncertain awe. One boy from the Krail species, a small aquatic creature with translucent membranes around his head, ran up to her, holding a folded piece of carbon paper. "Can you show me the trick?" he asked, in broken Standard Galactic. She paused, looked down at him, and gently shook her head. "It's not a trick," she said. Then she walked away, down the plaza steps, toward the dormitory sector, her shadow long behind her. Inside the arena, the scoreboard continued to blink. Top score, human sector. No one questioned it, but everyone, professors, cadets, officials, knew something had shifted. The age of equations was still alive. But something else had just entered the academy, and it had the shape of instinct. The next day, Tori was summoned before the Council of Applied Sciences, a rare assembly of instructors, advisors, and interplanetary observers who governed the academic standards of the Intergalactic Academy. These meetings were usually reserved for disciplinary hearings, graduation awards, or protocol reviews after scientific anomalies. Tori suspected hers was a little bit of all three. She entered the main chamber through a side corridor, her boots quiet on the polished irium tiles. The room was constructed in a perfect circle, with no corners or dominant center, designed to prevent the establishment of hierarchy and discussion. Still, the weight of hierarchy was thick in the air. The members of the council sat at a recessed ring encircling the platform at the center, which Tori stepped onto without hesitation. Above her, holographic projections shimmered, showing her launch data, the impact point on the moon, and overlapping simulations of what should have happened versus what had. Dozens of overlays revealed calculations, potential gravitational variance, and thermal distortions, each dismissed with a glowing red X that indicated logical insufficiency. Professor Rilvex was present, seated at the far end beside High Evaluator Mindral, a 10-foot-tall Maitari with eyes like polished obsidian and a breathing pattern that reverberated through the chamber like a slow heartbeat. Mindral spoke rarely, but when he did, his words were carved in policy. "Tori Carter," he began, voice a low rumble, "you have exceeded the parameters of your assignment. Not in ambition, but in result. You are aware your method contradicts the instructional foundation of this institution." "I'm aware it wasn't expected," she replied evenly. "You offered no mathematical verification of your procedure. I wasn't required to submit one." "That is true," he admitted. "But tradition assumes verification. And yet your result was perfect." She didn't respond. She simply held his gaze, unblinking. A Varthex instructor to her right tapped his long, crystalline fingers on a datapad. "We have deconstructed every available recording of your launch. The tension curve on your sling was uneven. The grip was asymmetric. There was no visible correction during release. These are errors by definition. And yet the projectile struck the center." "That wasn't error," she said. "That was adjustment." "Instinctual?" the instructor asked, almost mockingly. "Yes." A pause followed. Another member, an older Zalari female with a lattice of neural veins across her scalp, leaned forward. "I have reviewed your entrance records. Your planet is categorized as a Class 4 death world. Limited technology, short biological lifespans, and volatile ecosystems. You were accepted on experimental grounds only. Is it true you have no cybernetic augmentation? It's true. No atmospheric balancers? No neural assistant? Silence again. Zolari's eyes narrowed. Then how did you make that shot? I trained, she said. I used what I had. How did you know it would work? I didn't, she admitted. I just believed it could. The word believed seemed to ripple through the room like a toxin. Several instructors shifted in their seats. A belief was not a model. A belief could not be tested, repeated, or inserted into a curriculum. Belief in the academic structure of the academy was practically heresy. Explain to us what you felt, Professor Rilvex said softly. She turned toward him, surprised not by the request but by his tone. There was no sarcasm, no challenge. He was curious. I felt the sling pull against my arms, she said. I felt the wind trace across my face. I watched how the sky thinned as it neared the upper dome. I listened to the silence before the shot. I imagined the moon not as a calculation, but as something I could touch if I stretched hard enough. He tilted his head. And the result was, your proof? No, she said. The result was just the end of a process I trusted. High Evaluator Mindrel breathed deeply, and the chamber lights dimmed in response. His voice returned, slower now. This academy has spent thousands of years constructing the most advanced predictive systems known in our part of the galaxy. Every launch, every calculation, every test is part of a matrix that feeds into a larger understanding of the universe. And yet, you have succeeded without that matrix. I didn't reject the system, she said. I just didn't need it this time. And next time, I'll do what works. He leaned back in his chair, his massive frame settling against the arch behind him. A subtle tone echoed through the walls, signaling a closed debate. We have made our decision, he said. The holograms vanished. The ring lights faded. One by one, the council members stood. You will not be penalized for violating methodology, he continued, nor will you be elevated to honorary distinction. Your performance is outside the existing rubric. Therefore, we will not classify it within the rubric. She raised an eyebrow. You mean I passed? She asked. You passed, he confirmed, but not in the way this academy knows how to measure. She opened her mouth to speak, but stopped. Instead, she gave a simple nod. As she turned to leave, Professor Rilvex called out quietly, Tori. She paused, half glancing over her shoulder. I want you to meet someone, he said. She followed him down a corridor branching off from the main chamber. They walked in silence through a narrow hall filled with kinetic statues, each one representing a historic moment in galactic innovation. Most were alien. One showed a Gralaxian discovering gravitic inversion. Another depicted the Tharnari breakthrough in time dilation netting. She noticed there were no humans in this corridor. At the end of the hallway stood a door with no handle. It opened for him without a sound. Inside, a young girl sat on the floor surrounded by metal fragments, wiring, and what looked like parts of a broken drone. She had human features, no older than 10 or 11, with calloused fingers and dirt on her cheeks. Her clothes were patched and plain. She looked up as Tori entered, her eyes bright with curiosity. This is Sunna, Rilvex said. She was rescued from a mining colony orbiting Bastaran 4. She has no formal education, no genetic modifications, but yesterday she built a functioning atmospheric converter out of broken waste tech. We don't know how. Tori crouched beside the girl. Where'd you learn that? She asked gently. The girl shrugged. I just thought about it until it made sense. She is like you, Rilvex said quietly. We have more of you now, and we don't know what to do with you. You are anomalies. Tori stood, eyes still on the girl. Then stop treating instinct like contamination, she said. You already have the data. Maybe now you need something messier. He didn't reply. He simply looked at her for a long moment. Then he gave a small nod and left. Tori sat with the girl for a while after that, helping her piece together the drone's frame. The girl didn't ask about the launch. She didn't even ask why Tori was there. She just passed her a tool and started soldering wires as though she'd been waiting for someone like her to show up. By the time Tori left the room, the statues in the hallway didn't seem so foreign anymore. She didn't belong to their past, but perhaps she was shaping something else entirely, the future that didn't have a model yet. The weeks that followed felt like the pull of gravity had shifted around Tori. The Academy didn't officially acknowledge her shot beyond what had already been recorded, but the energy on campus had changed. She noticed it in the way cadets paused when she walked by, in how professors looked at her a moment longer than before, in the increased number of silent nods from those who had once laughed openly at her primitive tools. She never chased recognition, but she felt the hum of it beneath the surface now. A strange, unspoken resonance. One morning, she awoke to find a new alert in her inbox. The sender was the Office of Curriculum Development. Subject line, Pilot Elective Proposal Approved, pending first session. She tapped it open and read the first line twice before fully believing it. Primitive precision, applied intuition, and low-tech ingenuity. Instructor, Cadet Tori Carter. She stared at the screen for a long time. Her name looked out of place next to the sterile formatting of the Academy's official communications. She tapped the side of her thumb against the screen, as if expecting the letters to shift or vanish. But they remained. Someone had pushed this through. And she didn't need to ask who. 2 days later, she stood at the edge of a wide, open-air practice dome far from the main campus. This part of the Academy grounds was rarely used, mostly overgrown with native moss and low-rooted flowering stalks that whispered when the wind shifted. The dome shielding was still operational, but hadn't been recalibrated in years. It was imperfect, raw, exactly what she had requested. She had expected the first session to draw maybe 5 curious cadets, most of them likely just seeking entertainment. Instead, 16 showed up. Not a large number by Academy standards, but enough to surprise her. Most came from underrepresented systems or backgrounds that placed them on the edge of the academic hierarchy. She recognized a few, the quiet ones who always sat in the back rows, who worked alone and were rarely called on. Professor Rilvex arrived 20 minutes after the session began, standing silently by the edge, saying nothing. He watched with folded arms as Tori unrolled a large canvas sheet on the floor and began laying out materials, rocks of different weights, pieces of hardened resin. No monitors, no data ports. "I'm not here to teach equations," she said, looking each cadet in the eye. "You already know how to calculate. That's what this place does. But you've all been told instinct is unreliable. You've been told tools without processors are dead weight. We're going to test that." One girl raised her hand, a younger Krail with soft limbs and gills fluttering slightly. "What if we fail?" she asked. "You're supposed to," Tori said. "At first. The first few hours were full of misfires. Slings misaligned, projectiles fell short or flew wild, and one poor attempt landed a stone directly into a nearby vine bed, breaking the tension line entirely. But the cadets laughed, recalibrated manually, and tried again. And slowly, something began to change. One student, a tall boy from the fungal-based Renari species, discovered that his species' natural balance allowed him to compensate for inconsistent ground surfaces. Another realized that her eyesight could track movement patterns better than any optical scanner when she stopped overthinking her posture. Hands grew steadier, muscle memory awakened. Rilvix finally stepped forward. "Why aren't you showing them the physics models after each attempt?" he asked. "Because they'll start relying on those instead of themselves," Tori replied without looking up. "I want them to feel what works, not just memorize what should. And if what works contradicts the models," she smiled faintly, "then maybe the models need an update." That evening she returned to her dorm, not exhausted, but grounded, filled with a kind of quiet certainty she hadn't felt in weeks. The next day, 6 more cadets joined the class. By the end of the 3rd week, the group had doubled. Word had spread. Some professors criticized the course privately. Others called it a waste of institutional resources. But the Academy board had remained silent. Tori understood why. Change never walked in with a parade. It crawled in quietly, step by step, until one day no one could remember how things had been before it. One afternoon, after a particularly successful round of training where a cadet from the Iceworld cluster hit a near-perfect target using only wind correction and gut timing, Tori received a visitor. It was High Evaluator Minddraw. He didn't announce himself. He didn't ask for permission. He simply arrived at the edge of the dome during class dismissal, waiting until the others had gone before stepping forward. Tori stood near the target line, wiping resin dust from her hands. "I was told you don't make small talk," she said, without turning. "I don't," he replied. Then why are you here? To inform you of an institutional decision. About my course? No, he said. About you. She turned slowly. You are being offered the title of Applied Intuition Research Fellow. It's an experimental designation. It doesn't exist in our protocols. We are creating it now. She tilted her head. Why? Because we do not know how to categorize what you are doing. But we acknowledge its value. The system must adapt. She let the words sink in. And what do you want in return? She asked. He studied her for a moment. Nothing. Except that you continue. After he left, Tori sat on the floor of the dome, legs crossed, back resting against the anchor post of a practice sling. The sky above was turning lavender with the coming dusk, and the moon Vexen was just beginning to emerge behind a thin sheet of clouds. She watched it rise, without awe, without fear, just with recognition. She remembered the first shot. She remembered the stillness in her arms, the tension in the air, the split second when the world stopped and she let the stone fly. It wasn't about the impact, it was about the aim, and it had always started from within. A few meters away, Sanaa, the girl she had met weeks ago, sat alone, reassembling a broken circuit panel. The girl didn't speak, but she didn't have to. Tori had begun inviting her quietly to training sessions, letting her watch, sometimes asking her to set the tension ropes. Someday the girl would shoot her own stone, and the academy wouldn't know what hit it. Tori never wore the uniform of legacy. She never spoke the language of formulas or walked the polished steps of those who'd been engineered for excellence. She came with calloused hands, a sling of vines, and an eye for movement. And somehow that was enough. By the time her final term ended, primitive precision had become a permanent course. Other humans began applying from Earth. The Academy added a new department, unorthodox methods and frontier problem-solving. And in the archives, just beneath the statue of the first lunar strike, a plaque was added. It bore no numbers, just a quote. She aimed, and it worked, and it always would.